A quick reminder of what we saw, because the things that we saw, they don't play directly into what we'll be seeing this week, but they do fit into the big picture that we're trying to draw in our attempt to understand the basic, just the fundamentals of the approach of Rav Kook. So the first week, this is 2 weeks ago, we saw Rav Kook's approach to the question of the relationship between Torah and science. We saw how he basically gives an all-inclusive approach where he takes all the different fundamental approaches that existed until his day and was able to kind of give an understanding that kind of unites them all together and gives kind of a comprehensive understanding of the relationship between Torah and science. And that's what we saw. We kind of used the phrase I've been using is a paradigm shifting approach. We kind of takes a look at everything that was all the information and data that existed beforehand, and is able to look at all of it and see it in a new light, in a comprehensive and new light. So we saw in the first week in relationship to Torah and science. We saw last week in the way in which he understood the Akedah, with a profound statement about morality, the relationship between morality, the relationship between Torah and what I guess called natural morality. And we finished off the class by saying that Rav Kook kind of gives almost an opposite understanding to the way we usually understand the Akedah. If we usually understand the Akedah as the test being that we need to choose, or Avram Avinu, or us as Jews, we find ourselves sometimes having to choose between two competing sets of ideals. The ideals set forth by Hashem, the tzivui of Hashem, the command of the Torah, and the other ideal, a competing ideal of other things in our life. In this case, choosing between Avram's love of Hashem and his love of his son. So we usually think that Akedah is telling us that whenever you find yourself in a conflict between your connection to God and anything else in the world, your connection to God trumps. Okay, that the challenge is to choose Hashem over everything else. And Rav Kook read the Akedah in an opposite way, in which he tells us the challenge is not to choose between God and other things. The challenge is to realize that you don't have to choose between God and other things. The challenge is to find a way to not have to choose, to not have competing ideals, to find a way that everything else can fit within your relationship with Hashem. And that's the statement he said about morality. Okay, that natural morality cannot compete against religion, against the command of Hashem. They cannot compete against each other. Rather, the challenge is to find a way to make it fit within. Okay, so the challenge is not to choose Torah over other things. The challenge is to realize that there's no situation where you would have to. The challenge is to find how everything could fit within. That's the profound statement he said last week. A completely new way to look at the Akedah. And I did the introduction because I think we will need it this week as well. This week I'd like to take a look at the concept of freedom. So unlike previous weeks, we are not going to kind of look at everything that was said beforehand about him, because I think we've demonstrated a little bit. I'd like to use a bit of a different methodology this week. Now, I want to take a look very quickly at the first three sources, first three or four sources. I start off by asking, what do you say as a traditional Jew, who's familiar with the text, to what degree does the concept of freedom, liberty, play a role in our understanding of traditional Judaism? Can you think of a place within our tradition where we talk about where freedom or liberty appears as an important concept?
Well, the Yetziat Mitzrayim.
So Yetziat Mitzrayim. I'd say that's the primary place, and I think maybe the only place where the concept of freedom kind of appears. Okay, where it's focused on. So we see. I'll actually start with source number 4. Okay, so it doesn't make a difference exactly the context right now, but the pasuk says in Vayikra, "Ki li bnei Yisrael avadim, avadaihem asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, ani Hashem Elokechem." So loosely translated, Hashem is saying, because Bnei Israel are my slaves. Okay, they are slaves. They are my slaves. Avadaihem, they're my slaves. Asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, because I took them out of Mitzrayim. Ani Hashem Elokechem. So even though there is the concept of freedom, it's not a freedom which is similar to what we're familiar today. We're going to see this in a few minutes. It's rather that we become the slaves of Hashem. And a similar, very, very known pasuk, the source number 1, says in Shemot Lamed Bet, after Moshe Rabbeinu receives the luchot, the 2 tablets, it says the following: "V'aluchot maaseh Elokim hema, v'amichtav michtav Elokim hu charut al luchot." And the tablets were made by God, and the writing on the tablets is the writing of God that God Himself wrote. Charut al haluchot. Charut literally means what?
Freedom of the
Engraved. Okay, that the letters were engraved in the stone of the. Now there's a very, very famous midrash in source number 3 that says the following. Okay, it appears in Masechet Avot. It says the following: Al tikra charut ela chirut. She'en lecha ben chorin ela mi she'osek b'talmud Torah. I'll read the English. That you should not read the word charut, meaning engraved. Rather, read it as if it has a yud inserted after the chet, which would come out to be chirut, which means liberty. Okay? For there is no free individual except for he who occupies himself with the study of Torah. So what is the midrash basically coming and saying? It's saying, you tell me, how do you understand what the Mishnah? It's a Mishnah in Avot. What is the message trying to say? Don't understand that it's not, when we say engraved in the stone, we actually mean the freedom to be osek in the Torah. How would you understand this?
Perhaps in the way that there's effort involved in engraving. You have to take from that level and you have to dig down into it to achieve that levels, in the same way that limud as a process is either chipping away at the sources and trying to get.
I say chipping away. So that's the image you see here. The chipping away. Okay.
Alternatively, you're actually chipping away at your own resistance and your own. Right.
Excellent.
So it can work.
I think you stumble on it. And a lot of commentators talk about this. It's very strange. How did you just? What's the phrase you just used? Chipping away at your own resistance.
Yeah.
Okay. Meaning that the way in which the Mishnah understands this midrash of engraved, okay, because usually when you come in and say engraved, you're coming and saying that something is being forced, right? We're forced to do the mitzvot. And Hashem doesn't call it freedom, He calls it that us becoming free of Mitzrayim actually is making us into what? Slaves of Hashem. Now in English it sounds like a harsh word, slave, or subjugated, okay? Or servants. Servants is a little too mellow. Especially look at the pasuk and look at it. Ki libnei Yisrael avadim, avadaihem. It's like so even if you don't want to translate it as slave, say my subject, subjugated to me. I think slave would fit. I think it's trying to Don't think that leaving Egypt means there's a free fall. You're still slaves. Instead of being slaves, and I think that's and we'll try to see later. Rav Kook doesn't. I'm not going to quote from Rav Kook about this, but we're going to see. We're going to see that based on Rav Kook, it has a new light. But basically, the midrash is almost a mockery, because he's saying that you're taking the word which is cherut, which is saying charut, which you're engraving something in the stone. You're saying this is your freedom. But what do you mean? This is holding me down. I mean, this is telling me what to do. Now, this is the traditional way in which we see freedom. Okay, is exactly this. Okay, it's not freedom to do whatever you want. It's someone's telling you what to do. You are free to do what Hashem said. Okay, it's not. There's no concept in the Torah of individual freedom, that you are the sovereign. You are not the sovereign. Hashem is the sovereign, and you have free will. You are free to choose to follow the sovereign. Okay? One would say, and we're going to resolve it, but one would say it's almost an oppressive, meaning you are free to choose. Okay? You have two choices, right? You can choose life or death, and then the Torah says what? Uvacharta b'chaim. It's telling you, and you will choose life. Okay, so we're not going to get into the whole discussion about free will, although it does connect. But we're not going to get into the whole discussion about free will. But Torah says yes, there are two choices. I put before you life and death, and I'm commanding you. I expect you to use your free will to choose what I tell you to choose. The concept of individual sovereignty is not one which, at least on the surface, we see in Torah. And if I look at choice number 2, okay, which again asks about this word charut al haluchot, okay, that it's engraved, okay, that the mitzvah, the commandments, what is expected of us, is engraved in stone, okay, which means it's permanent, it's unchangeable, it's a reality, okay. So the midrash says the following. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, Cherut min ha-malchuyot. Also, he plays on this Cherut. This engravement can make us free from subjugation to the nations. Rabbi Nehemiah Amar, Cherut min ha-malchuyot. It can give us freedom from the angel of death. It can give us freedom from suffering. Okay, meaning that we can choose to follow what Hashem gave us and commands us to do, and this will save us from horrible things. So this, I would say, would be the traditional way in which religion, in which I'd say even all religions, but also we, for many, many years, saw the concept of freedom. We are free to do what Hashem said. Okay? And now, we're going to see, we're going to negate that for a second. If you look at choice 5, this is taken from the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, written in 1789. This comes at it's part of the French Revolution. Thank you. Yes, correct. Okay, and this is one of, not the only, but one of the forebears of the Enlightenment movement, or part of the Enlightenment movement. Okay, without getting into all of the history of the Enlightenment movement, not that I'm an expert of any kind, but we, as we all know, right, the motto of the French Revolution, one of the 3 pillars of the French Revolution was liberty. Okay, and the Declaration says the following: liberty consists of being able to do anything that does not harm others. Okay, what is freedom or liberty? Do anything as long as it doesn't harm other people. Thus, the exercise of the natural rights of every man or woman has no bounds other than those that guarantee other members of society the enjoyment of these same rights. And this became a staple concept of civil liberties, and the Declaration of Independence of the U.S. has elements of this. And this became a staple concept in the modern era of what liberty and individual liberty and rights are. And it's not a coincidence that the French Revolution, as we all know, so much of what it did was geared at the oppression of religion. The French Revolution specifically had to do with targeting the Catholic Church, but in general, and over here I come into an aspect of Rav Kook that we haven't addressed to this point, which is Rav Kook is living. He's born in 1865. Okay, so this is the middle, or the last third of the 19th century, and he passes away at the beginning, the first third of the 20th century, and he finds himself in an era where a significant percentage of Jews are being swept up by the Enlightenment movement. The Enlightenment movement, the Reform movement, as it's starting up in the 1860s, and as it's gaining ground, and more Jews for the first time in history, you have a very significant percentage of the Jewish people that are no longer part of the fold. Okay, they find themselves consciously choosing to lead a life which is not part of the traditional Jewish tradition. And so much of it had to do with Enlightenment. Okay, Enlightenment as the era of reason, of modernity, of science, natural rights, social contracts, all these ideals that Jews find themselves. These are these beautiful and wonderful ideas of individual sovereignty and natural rights and everyone and emancipation and all these other wonderful things. And they're saying, well, why do I need Torah and tradition, which seems primitive? I don't need it anymore. Look, I'm being accepted, and all these wonderful ideas and very importantly, and ideals, okay, which we're saying are wonderful and beautiful. The era of reason, or the age of reason, and Rav Kook finds himself facing, not the only one. And we're going to see what he does, how he understands the concept of freedom, and how he takes on this challenge of this idea of individual sovereignty and freedom, and how he's able to, like we said before, instead of trying to negate and saying, here, this is more than this, let me convince you why this is not important, why this is not part of Torah, why this is not part of Judaism, is able to take it and make it part of Torah, part of Judaism, and we'll see how he does this. So he says the following, in source number 6, he says the following: the sin of Adam Harishon. I brought the Hebrew because if you read the Hebrew and you're able to understand even a little bit, you see how poor the translation is, and it's not only because it's my translation, it's because anyone translating this, it would fall short of the beauty and the prose of the original. It says the following: the sin of Adam Harishon was that he alienated himself from his own essence, that he turned to the opinion of the serpent and lost himself. He couldn't answer the question of Ayeka, where are you? Because he no longer knew his own soul, because his true self was lost from him. What is Rav Kook saying here? He's saying something phenomenal. He says, what is the sin, the original sin of man? What was it? He says that he forgot himself. It's really a very different way in which we understand.
He forgot who he was.
He forgot who he was. Okay, he lost himself. How did he lose himself? By listening to the Nachash. Okay, meaning by not looking into his own soul and finding what is true and what is not true. Rather, by listening to a external source. Okay, so if during this age of enlightenment we have Immanuel Kant is one of the first ones who presents this concept of autonomous morality and heteronomous morality, meaning Rav Kook is coming and saying here the essence of man, okay, is his. A person doesn't need to look to an external source. And we'll see how he develops this. To an external source to know what is true. A person finds truth within himself. He says the sin was that man looked beyond himself for an answer of what to do or not to do. He went after someone else's advice. Rav Kook doesn't even focus on what the advice was. He says, look at it again. He alienated himself from his own essence. What does it mean that he alienated himself from his own essence? How did he alienate himself from his own essence? That he turned to the opinion of the serpent. And by that, he lost himself. And we see this results in the fact that when Hashem says Ayeka, and all the Mefarshim talk about this, Ayeka is not a geographical question. Hashem is not asking him technically, physically, where are you? He's asking him existentially, where are you? You're lost. Because you've lost yourself, because you've strayed from what you know was right, because you've depended on someone else, and therefore you lost yourself. Not because of the specific advice you were given. The mere fact that you expected to get direction from someone else, and you gave up on looking within your own soul. Rav Kook says, I didn't bring all that. I brought 3 or 4 sources. Rav Kook talks about in other places that the core aspect of what humanity is, okay, for instance, Rambam talks about the fact that the Tselem Elohim is our intellect. Rav Kook says that Tselem Elohim is our freedom. I'm not even talking about free will. Free will comes later, okay? Freedom, the fact that we have the ability that we are not bound by anything, he says that is our Tselem Elohim. So he says, Tselem Elohim is our freedom. I want to turn the page. And you mentioned before that the one place in which when we think of the concept of freedom, that we think about Pesach, Yetziat Mitzrayim, Pesach, right? Chag HaCherut, right? So Rav Kook has a beautiful piece where he has a perush on the Haggadah, okay? And in that he writes the following. I really took just an excerpt, and he writes the following. This is a bit more of a down-to-earth text. He writes the following: the difference between a slave and a free person is not just a matter of social status. One may find an educated slave whose spirit is free, And a free person, the person may find, you can also find a free person whose spirit is that of a slave. True freedom is that lofty spirit through which an individual, as well as a nation, elevates himself to be faithful to his inner self, to the truth of the divine image, of the Tzenem Elohim within him. I'll stop here for a second and go back to that, repeat that sentence. He says, true freedom, and I'm skipping a little bit. Okay, he says, true freedom is not 1, 2, 3. Rav Kook tends to have very complex sentences. He says, true freedom is not 1, 2, 3. Rather, true freedom is to be faithful to your inner self. Okay? Now this seems to be so foreign to what we're accustomed to thinking. That, meaning, you have a rabbi saying here, be true to who you are. Okay? Torah, a free person. Now, if I am a person during the age of enlightenment, I am become accustomed to thinking of Torah as an external force that tells me something which is foreign to me. Do something which is foreign to you. Do something which is strange to you. Do something that doesn't make sense. Do something that doesn't necessarily feel natural. And Rav Kook is coming and saying here, we'll get to a second how he sees Torah, but he's saying here, true freedom is being true to who you really are. Here, let's continue. Through this can he feel, 4 rows from the bottom of this paragraph, of source number 7. Through this can he feel, the person, that his life has purpose, direction, and that his life is worth their value. One whose spirit is servile, on the other hand, will never sense the true quality of his own identity, which will always depend on what is considered good and proper by that who dominates him in one form of control or another. What he says is the following. Okay, if I were to try to simplify what he's saying, someone would go and say there's 2 kinds of subjugation or of slavery and 2 kinds of freedom. There's technical physical freedom. Someone who's slave, someone who has a physical master who tells him, do this, don't do this. Someone who controls you physically. Okay? He is the master, you are the slave, you are not free. Saying, but he says, but that is a very technical thing, and that is a form of slavery, and that is a form of freedom to remove the shackles of the person who is physically subjugating you, like leaving Mitzrayim. Okay, it says, but there's a whole other kind of freedom, which is just like there are physical things that don't allow you to do what you want to do. I want to go here, I have a slave who doesn't let me. I want to do this, I have a slave telling me, no, now you're going to do what I tell you. So there's also spiritual slavery, okay, which is all kinds of emotional, spiritual, sociological, philosophical, all kinds of things that force you, that subjugate you, and force you to do things which are not what you really want. If I were to oversimplify this, I would come and say, Rav Kook is making a distinction between what you want and what you really want. When I speak to high schoolers, my students in high school and yeshiva, when ulpana, I come and say that we all know sometimes we feel like doing something, okay, but it's not what we really want. Okay, if I were to, I really want to be on a diet and not to eat this thing, but I get carried away. I give in to either the fact that everyone's eating it and I want to stand out, so I'm giving in. I'm basing my actions based on what someone else is saying or doing. Or I wake up at 12 o'clock at night and I go to the fridge and I stuff myself with cake, and then I'm saying at that moment I wanted to eat this cake, but really deep down that's not my true will. So Rav Kook is making this distinction between an external will and a real will. So he's saying there's 2 kinds of slavery. There's physical slavery, which is being physically subjugated by someone. And he said there's a whole other kind of freedom, or slavery, which is less physical things that influence me, influence me to do things I don't want to do, or believe in things I don't want to believe. So he comes and says that true freedom is being able to unshackle ourselves from both of these things, both the physical things that are subjugating us, but also the spiritual things, sociological things, those things that are accepted, those things, those ideals that, I don't know, that the civilizations around us are telling us this is the right thing. And okay, so so what do we have so far? We have source 6 that talks about the fact that the essence of man, okay, the tzelem Elohim of humanity is freedom, okay, is being able to look into a person's own soul and to find what is right. And then we have him saying this neat idea, or not neat, just interesting idea. I think anyone could agree with it. That there's 2 layers to our reality. There's our physical, there's physical slavery and freedom, and there's spiritual slavery and freedom. Now I'm going to go to source 8, which, when I first read this, when you really understand this source, it's really phenomenal. Okay, because now we come and say, how can you, Rav Kook, say that freedom? How can you be an observant religious Jew, a rabbi nonetheless, a tremendous rabbi, person of great hashkafa and machshava, and say that the essence of man is to be true to himself? And look how he says it. True freedom is being faithful to your inner self. So someone would say, well, excuse me, my inner self is not to keep Shabbos. My inner self is that I fall in love with this woman, and I feel it. I feel in the deepest level of my being that I want to be with this person. So you're saying to me, I need to be true to that freedom is to be true to my inner self, and that's okay to be true to my inner self. I have to be true, that the essence of man is to be true to who I really am. This is who I am. I want to marry her, but the Torah says I can't marry her. Torah says I can't eat this. Torah says I can't go there. Torah says I can't drive on Shabbat. How could these 2 things possibly fit? So in source number 8, Rav Kook says the following. The just man, in Hebrew it says Ha'adam HaYashar. So I translate it as just. But Yashar means more than just just. It means someone who's straight, but straight and just. Okay, we all understand Yashar. Ha'adam HaYashar. He says Ha'adam HaYashar tzarich leha'amin b'chayav. The just man, or straight man, must have faith in his life, or must believe in his own life. Meaning that he believe in his own life and feelings, and that his soul will direct him in a just and righteous path. So the first thing is, and this is very consistent with source number 6, okay, that a person should have faith in his own, and have faith in who you are. Have faith in the fact that I can find truth and morality. I can find all these things within myself. There's value to my life, independent of anything and anyone else. Have faith in the value of your life. Okay? This is consistent with what he said in source 6. Because if you understand that that the divine image in us is freedom, based on the fact that, and I'm not going to the theological part of it. He says that this is a consequence of the fact that Hashem Himself is one of His core attributes is freedom, and that manifests itself in God's ability in creation. And therefore, but I'm not going to get to the theological part of it, because we're really touching we're really just seeing really on the tip of an iceberg of some of these things. But if you understand that Tzelem Elohim Sheba'adam, the thing that makes us human is our freedom, our ability to act without being forced. So of course, it makes sense. You come and say, a person must know this, must know that there's value to your life within itself, independent of anything else. Then look what he goes to. But in that case, again, comes the question, so how does Torah play into this? Torah is a whole set of rules and laws that tells you, this you should do, this you shouldn't do, this is how you should behave, this is how you shouldn't behave. So if our life is so valuable, and we are like God because we are free, and we can choose, and we can create based on our own independent thought and feelings, then where's the room for Torah? Okay, the whole Enlightenment movement was based on this: that a person has the right to do whatever he wants as long as he doesn't harm another person. So Rav Kook is almost saying the same thing. So where's Torah in this? Enlightenment movement used this idea to reject religion. That all of religion is external, it's an external source, an external subjugation of some kind, be it God, or be it the priest, or be it whatever it is. So Rav Kook says the following. The Torah, something amazing. He says the Torah needs to serve as a candle at his feet, by whose light he will see the places where a mistake may occur and one may stray. The Israeli person, and this is not Israeli person as in a citizen of the state of Israel, but Hadam HaYisraeli, meaning this is the phrase he does. Rav Kook does not use the phrase Yehudi. He uses Israel. If I had to be, I don't like using the word, but Israelite. Okay, meaning a Bnei Israel, a descendant of the not Jewish people. That's a different phrase, of the Israelite people, a nation. Okay, so the Hadam Israeli must believe that a divine soul resides in him. Do you see how we resolved the question? He's basically saying, yes, you need to be true to yourself, but who is it the you that you say, I believe in this me? What is it that how do you know? Or when you come and say, for instance, take the example, I know, I can feel that I really want to marry this woman, let's say. Okay? What layer of your personality is saying that, is feeling that? So if we were to go to the two layers of will, if I were to stop you at midnight when you're going on a crazy sugar thing and you're standing there with the what do you call it, the whipped cream, and they're standing at midnight and it's into your mouth, come and say, do you want this? Yes. But if I were able to eliminate the craving that you have at this moment and say, do you really want it? They say, of course I don't. So what layer of your personality is saying, I want to be Mechal Shabbat, I want to eat this food that I'm not supposed to eat, I want to marry this non-Jewish person? What layer of your personality? Is that the real inner you? Or is that some external aspect of your personality, which has been influenced by this or by that? So Rav Kook comes and says, and it's amazing, he says, the foundation is not the Torah. The Torah comes as chapter 2. Chapter 1 is your neshama. And from that, your individual personality. And first and foremost, Adam HaRishon exists, and he is told, be you. Then at the later stage in history and time, in a development comes Torah comes and says, you know what? Hashem says, there's a possibility of you forgetting who you are and what you are, who the true you is. So I'm giving you something which seems external. It is. Torah is a book, it's external, but this is something which will reveal to you, help you realize and discover and remember or discover or uncover who you really are. But I'm not expecting you to follow some external source. It's not heteronomous, it's autonomous. But this is going to help you realize that this is autonomous. That this is who you really are. And there's another, it's almost a poem that he wrote, and any translation of Rav Kook is difficult, and a poem even more so. He says the following. It's beautiful. I actually just discovered this yesterday. I myself was not familiar with this text. I found it, I said I could not, that's why I had to squash the whole page just to get this in. It says the following. The individual finds himself within himself. Then he finds himself within his surroundings, his friends, community, and people. The community finds itself within itself. You don't have to look at the whole world and everyone else to discover who you are. All of Western civilization does that. Okay? This is what we're taught. Look over there. If you do this, you'll be happy like them. If you act like this, our whole culture is based around it. He says, no. The individual finds himself within himself. The community finds itself within itself. Then it finds itself within all humanity. First, discover who you are as an independent entity. Then you go to the next stage, and now I can know who my family is, and find value to my family within my own. And then humanity finds itself within itself. Then it finds itself within the world. The world finds itself within itself. Then it finds itself within all the world surrounding it. I want to read it gets a little, each stage it goes a little more complex. At some point it becomes, the phrases uses are a little bit, they're from Kabbalah and it's difficult to understand. And then he says the following. Then all of these recognitions fuse together to become one unit, whose inclusiveness is glorious beyond investigation, whose particular nature is strong, flawless, whole and outstanding, endless and perpetual. And the flow of life flows ever more strongly, and the light of holiness grows increasingly stronger. The singers and flute players proclaim together, all of my wellsprings are within you. Okay? All of my wellsprings are within you. You referring to Hashem. Coming and saying that a person looks deep into himself. Okay, and feels that there's value to who he is because he is an independent identity, and from that he grows and he sees, okay, it gives me a new understanding of who I am, a deep understanding. It's not dependent on anything or anyone outside. And then the circles grow, and he says that at the end of the day, he says it's all part of one big thing, and it all and as it gets from the small to the bigger, all of my wellsprings are within you, Hashem. And this is where he comes full circle, and he comes back to come and say, yes, there's value to freedom. But what is this freedom? Where is this freedom coming from? What is it being influenced by? Is it being influenced by external things? External things can be not only religious figures and doctrine. It could also be all kinds of isms, like universalism, or socialism, or equalism, or all kinds of other isms. Or environmentalism. And you can come and say, and all these things can be... Now, what Rav Kook did is, he took the concept of freedom, which is a tool that people said, this is something which is valuable. People felt, humanity, as well as many Jews, I think there's something here which makes sense. This concept of individual sovereignty and freedom. So there's something here where they said, this is obviously something significant. They felt this is something, humanity, and you think about that first class that we had, they felt humanity was ready for this. It developed in all of humanity, especially all of Western civilization, felt there's something new here that's being revealed in the world, and Jews were flocking to it because it has true value. But Rav Kook did, instead of coming and saying, this is Goyish, this is foreign to us, come and said, no, this is not foreign to us. This is true and valuable, and therefore it must be part of what we believe in as well. And he found a way to come and say, he made it, he took this thing which was used as a tool to bash and seemingly to break down tradition and reality, come and say, no, use it to bolster, to come and say, no, this thing that you think is so valuable, it is so valuable. But it's so valuable because it is the essence of what we're all about. Freedom. But freedom that understands that there could be all kinds of things that influence you. And that if you understand truly who you really are, you understand that this external doctrine is not external doctrine. It's just revealing to you who you truly are inside. And if you look deep, without any kind of influence, you will find that purpose, that holiness, that tradition within yourself. So he's taken something which seemed competing, and was not only competing, but was being used to move away, to destroy tradition. And he came in, not only did it's not just that he converted it, he also changed our understanding of Torah. He gave us a whole new, he revealed to us, not only did he, it's not just a tool, a trick to get the people who were finding themselves to be non-religious, here, I'll give you a way to come back. He also developed a new understanding for us within Torah itself. What about me? I was never going after those things, but I now have a new understanding that the Torah itself expects me to have this understanding of that everything I do should come from an autonomous perspective. And this is also a classic example of what Rav Kook does. Now, we're not going to do this in future weeks because we don't have enough time, but he does the same thing with nationalism, with socialism, with universalism, with art. He takes the emphasis that Enlightenment had on the arts, and he comes and he goes and he does the same process. He goes and he says nationalism. We're going to talk about this a little bit in 2 weeks, in our last session. He takes nationalism. Nationalism is being taken as something as anti-religious, and he comes and says, no. Nationalism fits perfectly within Torah. Torah believes in nationalism, but a different kind of nationalism. One that has a different perspective, one that has a deeper perspective. And he comes and it's not just that he finds a way to bring these people and come and saying, the same thing that you believe in, you don't have to leave Judaism to believe in this. It's not just that he finds a way to bring them back, he gives all of us those who did not find themselves going outside, a new and deep understanding of things that we knew beforehand. We knew about Cherut. And if we had the time, I would reread the Midrash, how Rav Kook understands Cherut. That, yes, that chiseling is not an external thing. The freedom and the chiseling is one and the same. But I'm not going to do the whole thing now. But basically, this is what Kook does. He goes through all of the concepts that were being used at the time as these big ideals that seemed to be confrontational to Judaism. Not only finds a place for people to hold those same ideas within Judaism, he gives a whole new understanding within Torah itself of these ideals. So instead of freedom being something as an excuse or something to pull people away from Torah, it comes and says, no, there's room for the ideal of freedom, of personal autonomy, and autonomous sovereignty and autonomous morality, but with a whole new understanding that what is this freedom? It's something that is not influenced by anything or anyone. Remove all those things and you'll find that same holiness and that we always had.
But how does that, okay, I understand it from a point of view of his approach, but when it really gets down to it, how is the behavior of someone who thinks the way he's thinking, and someone who thinks the more, let's suppose it's, the Eastern European way at the time, pre-Haskalah way.
Okay.
How is there any difference in their behavior? Because ultimately, still Torah is the guiding light. Still, it's the restrictions on people, and so on and so forth. So in terms of,
I understand the question. I'll give you an answer. It's like the same difference between a child, and I mean this metaphor with completely. It's like a child, okay, who's brushing his teeth, and an adult who's brushing his teeth. A child who's brushing his teeth, he's doing it because if he doesn't do it, his parents are going to punish him. Okay? The action itself of the actual back and forth of brushing his teeth is identical. The adult is doing it because he understands the value of it. Okay? I'm really, really oversimplifying it. But wait, I want to explain what I mean by this. The action, to someone who's looking from the outside, the action looks the same. But he is doing it because he doesn't understand, the kid doesn't understand it, he doesn't want it, he would prefer not to, he doesn't like the flavor, he would much prefer to go to sleep now, he'd much prefer to do 100 other things, but he's scared. Okay, his understanding of his actions, they come from a very superficial place. That he's being forced by a scary authority figure to do it. Okay, or he's being bribed by an authority figure. Wait. Versus an adult who does it because I'm doing this because I want to, because I understand I need to and I want to. That's the difference. It's exactly the same.
Really, in his mind, pre-Haskalah Judaism was kind of dictatorial, authoritative.
It was a childish one.
A childish one.
A very childish one, yes.
That can be addressed sort of differently. It can be addressed saying this is because in those days they weren't properly educated. There was the level of education, the kind of.
Well, again, because there was a childish Judaism. Okay, it was one. So then comes enlightenment. Okay, and suddenly there's these wonderful ideas that come and say, I can live a life of purpose and meaning and value,
and you don't think
even with
Jew taught, and there was no pre-Haskalah Jew who would think that.
I'd say on the masses level, no. No, not a level of masses. Meaning along comes something called enlightenment and reveals to us that, look, you can lead a life of purpose and meaning, of value, without all kinds of strange, without just following all this doctrine and rules. And then Rav Kook comes and says, no, all these doctrine and rules, they're not doing it just because Hashem said so. All too often we still say, how often do we still say, why do we do it? Hashem said so. Yes, we do it because Hashem said so. But we always say that, but we come and say also, but if you understand correctly, why did Hashem say so? Because this is who we truly are. Meaning a child says, why did I brush my teeth? Because my parents said so, that's why I do it. And an adult says, I did it because the dentist told me, but I know the dentist told me to do it because I believe him that I need to do it for my own sake. That's the difference.
Do you not think there's a childish kind of a narrative within the Chumash itself?
Within
the Chumash itself, about for example, these are the brachas, these are the klavas, this is a kind of a childish, kind of authoritative approach too. So it's not something that came out of pre-Haskalah Judaism, the way they practice it. It goes right back to the Chumash. It's the way the Chumash.
Yes. The Chumash is phrased that way, because the Chumash needs to be able to relate to all times and all people. But I'll give you an example. So a Rav Kook reading of it would point out what so many people miss and don't notice, that all of the brachot and klot and all the rewards and punishment in Tanakh, okay, are not geared at the individual. Nowhere does it say, you, Mr. and Mrs. Jew, if you do the mitzvot, this is the reward you're going to get. Or if you do the avirot, this is what's going. It's always the brachot and kolot. They're talking about the collective. There are only two exceptions to that. But 99% of the time, when it talks about brachot and kolot, it's talking about to the nation, and that's a whole different conversation. But to the individual Jew, it's not talking. Now, in an era where all of Judaism, the majority of Judaism, is based on we're small and he's the scary commander. We need to follow what he says because we have to. So you understand that reading as like, okay, this is talking. There's no difference between the community and the individual, between the nation and the individual. But when I look at it now with my new understanding of Rav Kook, I come and say, I'd say, how does this fit with Torah? So and I look and I say, you know what? I never noticed this before. And for 1,000 years, it's possible that no one noticed this before. That all of the brachot and kolot are not geared at the individual. At no point in the Torah does it say you that your motivation, that Torah expects your motivation, personal motivation for kiyum Torah mitzvot should come from fear of punishment or expectation of reward. But I only reached that realization once, I think we could only reach that realization and have that reading in the Torah, which was always there. This is what I call it a paradigm shifting approach. It was always there. But now we come and say, we never realized. Okay, because the Torah is eternal and it can be read in each generation based on the level and the message that's needed for that generation. So I actually like this ending as
his reading of the Haskalah would be because Judaism was taught the way it was, and people were brought up the way they were with a very childish kind of perspective on the mitzvot and so on and so forth. That freedom for them was kind of getting out of all this oppression of restriction and so on.
So Rav Kook talks at length, and with this we'll finish. Rav Kook talks at length, and he says that there's a reason. He says that a lot of that context, so that atmosphere of religion as somewhat oppressive, he says that was an influence that we got from Christianity. He has a whole theory, and he develops this in great length, that this concept of man being subjugated to religion or to the higher authority. He says this was never the fundamental narrative of Judaism. He said only when we became under the influence of when we went into galut, went into exile, and without knowing, without noticing, we adopted certain, forget about behaviors, not behaviors. We adopted certain cultural associations or philosophical influences that we didn't even notice. This idea of and he goes, and I'm not going to try now because it's a long theory. And it says, and therefore the same relationship that the Enlightenment had the same influence. The same influence that it had on the general society had on us as well, because we had adopted certain thought patterns and behavior that was similar to theirs. Now, we kept, as a whole, the community, we kept observing the mitzvot. They came more and more. We started something which is external to us, something which is oppressive, something which is not. And then, at some point, humanity came and said, this is too oppressive, this is too much, I'm getting rid of this, and develops a new way to find value and purpose without those things. And the Jews come and say, okay, because the kiyum Torah mitzvot became more and more childish, less purposeful, less meaningful. It was not explained deeply. It was, and this will actually be a perfect lead-in, because next week we're going to be talking about Rav Kook's approach to kfira, to heresy. And kfira, which is a fundamental thing in understanding, and it ties directly into what we just said now.